Hey, Reframables, it's Nat.
And Beck, two very different sisters who come together to reframe some of life's big and small problems. We're moms, writers.
We have soft boundaries. We see the world differently, but we both lean into vulnerability together and with our guests. We like deep dives. So come with us. Let's reframe something. We are reframing perfectionism with author L'Oreal Thompson Payton. Hi, L'Oreal.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
We're thrilled that you're here. Okay, tell us about everything to do that is you.
Everything.
Your gigs, all the hats you wear, ready, set, go.
All the things. First and foremost, I am a writer. I've been writing, I feel like since I was 3. There's like a picture of me and my sister sitting on the sofa, and I have a notepad in my lap and a pen in my hand, and I feel like nothing has changed since then. And so writing is near and dear. It's what I love most. So by day, I'm health and wellness reporter for Fortune. And I feel like nights and weekends and like lunch breaks, I'm a first-time author. My book, Stop Waiting for Perfect, comes out this August 15th. I'm a mom and a wife and like all the things. But for me, the writing comes first and foremost.
Your book, Stop Waiting for Perfect, it's so interesting because I'm a lifelong sufferer of perfectionism. So I read this with interest. You bring up right away this love-hate relationship to Peloton and the blue dots.
Yeah.
My daughter is obsessed with the Duolingo streaks. It's interesting because perfectionism does show up really differently for each one of us, right? Because I'm not obsessed with streaks, but I definitely am a sufferer of perfectionism. So it'll just be interesting to unpack how it shows up for us differently. But maybe can you just talk to us about this gamification of apps and what that did to you, and then how you realized that you were obsessed?
That I have a problem. Let's just call it what it is. And it's timely actually, because I just lost another, I think it was like a 20-day streak or so. So not my longest. The one I write about in the book was after 2 years. Like I had gotten my Peloton bike right before the pandemic started. And honestly, it was like a saving grace for me because, the world shut down and we're home, and movement has always been a form of medicine and meditation for me. Like it's as much as about physical health as it is my mental health. And so that's also how I think I tricked myself into being like, no, this is a good obsession to have because it's healthy, right? Quotation marks. And what I found, what really drew me to Peloton in particular, were the blue dots, because they were essentially like the gold stars that I was so used to getting as a child, being a straight A student, getting the perfect attendance award, and all of these things that grown-ups don't get. So that gamification, it held me accountable. Like I had good intentions when I started off, because let's work out every day. And then as I got into it, I found ways to cheat the system and maintain my streak. I would like listen to meditations kind of like haphazardly while I was brushing my teeth, or I would like play, a quick 5-minute class in the background while I was doing something else because I wanted to maintain the streak at all costs. I even listened to one of their meditations because they count as workouts in the app on the way to the hospital at 3 a.m. the morning of my scheduled C-section.
Oh my gosh.
That's when I should have known that I had a problem. And I also did like the guided walks up and down the hospital halls after, giving birth, because I am like not very kind to myself in that way. And I was, hell bent on maintaining the streak at all costs. And then of course, one nondescript Tuesday when we had to take her to a doctor's appointment and there was so much more going on, and like Peloton was on the bottom of my to-do list, I forgot. I realized, I think it was like 12:01. Like, so right after the clock resets, and I cried real tears. I'm not proud of it, but that just goes to show you the unhealthy obsession that came about. And so I had to really challenge myself, be like, what does this mean? Am I still worthy, even if I don't have a perfect workout streak? Am I still a good person? Because I had tied, I think, a lot of morality to this goodness of working out and being healthy and all of the things. And so it was a very hard lesson in unlearning imperfection, and one that I continue to learn. And I've now, have more grace for myself. If I skip a day, I'm getting over a cold, as you might hear. So I hadn't worked out the last 3 days. And there was a point in time where I would listen to the meditations or do something to like keep it going. And now I'm like, that's not important. And it doesn't mean that I'm a better person if I do it or I don't. So we need to let that go.
Yeah. Although I've been reading in other places, it seems to be something that society or culture writers are starting to think about. The apps, the Circle, the iPhone app Circle.
Oh, yeah. On their watch. Yeah.
Yeah, that you want it to close. And we're so just.
Yes. Wearing it as we speak. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty extreme version, listening on the way to give birth. Sometimes it takes those extreme moments to shake us out of what we're doing.
It's interesting with my Fitbit because I haven't gotten to the next step of like the Apple Watch or whatever. I've just got still the old Fitbit, but I will find myself jogging on the spot to get the last 60 steps in, and I'll show my 8-year-old, all excited to show him the little bird that flies across my bracelet when I hit my 12,000. So it's interesting hearing somebody else's experience of that as you're problematizing it, which maybe means I want to too, as opposed to celebrating it.
And it's interesting because I went through like 3 or 4 different Fitbits before I was finally like, okay, let me just get the Apple Watch. And the same, like wanting to close the circles was very helping on that. And there was this past November, my family was in Hawaii after Thanksgiving, and I had hiked Diamond Head, this volcano, years ago when we went to visit. And so I was like, I can do it again, this time with a 20-pound toddler strapped to my back. And it's like Morgan Freeman narrating my life would be like, she would soon learn that she could not do it again. And we were like the last summit. So like the last set of stairs to the top of the volcano, I could see it, but I was exhausted. And we turned around and went back to the benches and I sat down. And that was hard for me because there was, again, once upon a time where I would have pushed through. I would have gone to the top because that's what I do. I set a goal and I achieve it no matter what that does to my mental health, my physical health, my spiritual health. And I've been working with a therapist who's challenged me to ask myself, like, in times when you find yourself in these circumstances, what would you want Violet, my daughter, to do? And I thought of that. I heard her voice as we were approaching the top, and I was just like, I would want her to listen to her body and take a break. So we turned around, we sat down. She was just turned 1 at the time. And I told her, I was like, Mommy's tired. So we're going to sit down. We're going to take a break because it's important that we listen to our bodies. That's like what I want to instill in her, and not this like go hard or go home at all times kind of drive, because I know the damage that has done to me. And I don't want to pass that legacy of perfectionism on to her.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. Also, my daughter is also Violet.
Oh, I love that for them.
I loved all your references to therapy because I just had a therapist session yesterday. And it was so funny. I was telling my daughter that I was going to be busy from 4 to 5 because I was in therapy. And then she says to me, I'm just so confused by this. She says, am I your therapist?
Oh.
That's brilliant.
I do not know what to make of this because I was explaining that I was going to go to therapy, but that I wasn't sure if I was going to keep going after this because I was working through a specific problem. And then she says, after I explain all that, am I your therapist?
Oh.
I don't even know. So I don't know if she thinks like, okay, we'll just pause right there. But anyway, I have a daughter named Violet and I like therapy.
Same. We should make shirts. I like that.
Yeah, I have a daughter named Violet and I like therapy. Okay. Anyway.
I'm problematizing who is my potential therapist across the front of your shirt.
Right. Yeah. Very meta, all of it.
Yeah.
Seriously. Oh my goodness. Well, it's interesting. I can relate. I actually have to question my own therapy sessions with my 8-year-old too. So I'm curious how much we're doing in terms of like the passing on, right? The legacy of not just perfectionism, but even like how we talk to our kids, just like unpacking and parsing the language we use. And so like, I was curious because you actually did, you went and defined how the American Psychological Association defines perfectionism. This is what you describe it as a cocktail of excessively high personal standards and overly critical self-evaluations. And that we can all understand that intellectually. as like thinking adults, right? But then there are these people, these little people, and then there are partners and friends, and everybody who sort of like falls within our circle of care are also impacted by moments of or lifetime habits of perfectionism. And I'm just curious if there have been any kind of moments of pause. You've just described one in terms of climbing that volcano, which is such an interesting example with a 1-year-old to be able to use your words carefully. But have there been others that have really struck you in terms of like, oh my gosh, this needs to get checked in terms of like its impact on others?
Even the process of writing the book, and it's so ironic because literally the title is Stop Waiting for Perfect, but I found that writing it, this book was like a masterclass in unlearning perfectionism, and the fact that writing it coincided with the birth of my daughter. And so it was like I was getting it from both sides, right? Like professionally and then personally, this confrontation that I never had to face before with my own perfection because I didn't know any other way. Like I said before, straight A student, perfect attendance. And it wasn't like my parents put that pressure on me. I distinctly remember when I got like a B or something and I was upset. And my mom told me then, in grade school, you put too much pressure on yourself. But I wanted the awards. I wanted the gold stars. I wanted all of these things. And I saw the rewards that came with them, the grades and the certificates and everything else, getting into the college that I wanted and getting jobs and everything like that. Like my perfectionism was always rewarded. And then comes parenting, and perfection and parenting don't go together at all. And so that was a real big slap in the face. You can have a plan and then the baby's like, meh. Or even like pregnancy, getting pregnant, right? We had to deal with IVF and we experienced infertility. And so there was like, I have a plan, and then life happens and it's like, haha, guess what? And then writing the book, it was like in my head, I'm going to write it at the coffee shop with my oat milk latte and a lo-fi playlist in the background. And if I had waited for those perfect moments to write the book, they would have never happened because perfection doesn't exist. And it's like, I know this intellectually. I know that first drafts are not meant to be perfect, right? Like Anne Lamott calls them shitty first drafts for a reason. And yet I was holding myself to this super high standard because I feel like I always have something to prove, especially as a Black woman in America. There's this, working twice as hard to get half as much. So I can't come with some half-ass first draft, right? Like it has to be perfect upon submission for them to take me seriously as a first-time author so that I have an opportunity to write more books. And also for other Black women writers who are coming after me, there's a lot of pressure that I continue to put on myself that I realize is unhealthy. And so I'm learning that because therapy, but it's practice. And that's what I'm learning. Like there will be falls and stumbles. There's moments and I catch myself. So even the purpose of the book, like it started as a book about how to overcome imposter syndrome, which again was kind of like, haha, who am I to tell people when it's something that I experience on the regular as well. But I think now what I've learned is that there's not a such thing as overcoming imposter syndrome and perfectionism and self-doubt. Like they're all closely related first cousins. The goal of this book and the tips that I share with readers is to shorten that spiral because I'm someone who can spiral very quickly. Just like at the drop of a dime, I have my anxiety spray right next to me on my desk at all times, like in case of emergency or, anxiety. So just finding these tools to help shrink that time, that cycle, that spiral that can sometimes be onset by perfectionism and imposter syndrome and self-doubt, and knowing that I'm not meant to do this perfectly. There will be times that I stumble, but it's important that I have a toolkit essentially and the support and people around me to help pick me up when I'm down and keep going, because it's very easy to just kind of like, oh, well, I didn't get it right, or I didn't get that job, I didn't get this internship, whatever it might be, and just kind of like count yourself out. But it's important, throw yourself a pity party. Of course, I love a good pity party, but then you got to throw yourself back in the ring and try again. And if you didn't do it perfectly, that's okay. That's not the point. Perfection doesn't exist. And it's like, we all know this, but now we need to start living it.
Yeah, I like that the idea of the goal is to just help people shorten their spiral, because it's false to say that we can stop these spirals. Maybe some of us realize that easier than others. Some of us need the constant reminders. But are we not interested in where it comes from? I mean, this perfectionism, you bring up in the book, being a Black woman in America that you feel this pressure. I feel it as a white woman. I feel it's more of a problem for women in general. Do we think that? I mean, I can see it in my mom. Like, it's so interesting. Sorry, mom. Like, for instance, she's trying yoga right now and she finds it so challenging. And she keeps bringing up that she knows she doesn't look graceful when she does it. And she'll bring up what she's really good at is the piano. And she's really struggled in her life with wanting to do the things that she's good at. And I relate to that so hard, but I don't see that struggle the same way in my husband. And I don't know if that's the white man syndrome, like that you bring up too. I mean, it's probably exists in him, but not to the same degree that it exists in me. Like, I just beat myself up when I make a mothering mistake, or, I think about how I can't get meal plans organized, like just that I can't find balance. And is it going to take me my whole life to figure this out? And it's just, I don't know. What's the deal? Like, I want to blame my parents, my mom, but that's not fair. Like, why does she bear the burden of that? But it seems to be a struggle that women in particular face.
Oh, absolutely. I 100% inherited my mom's perfectionism, and she's a Virgo. So I feel like it's like heightened. And it's just, there's so many reasons, right? There's condition, like before we exit the womb even, it's like, oh, you're having a girl. And I'm very cognizant of not, priding people, be like, oh, like, what a good girl, or like those sort of things that I'm just like, no, we're nipping this in the bud right now. I don't care if she's only 20 months. I don't want to have that be the thing that she like aspires to, because that was me. That still is me a bit, right? To be good, to be obedient, to be the good daughter, the good wife, the good mom. Don't even get me started there, because there were plenty of tears. And that's actually why I switched therapists. I had like, I don't know that it's called a regular one, but I switched to someone who specializes in postpartum depression and anxiety, because when I combined that need for perfectionism and to be considered a good mom, it was too much. The hormones, everything was like, it was a very dangerous cocktail. And so she's been very helpful with me and like talking me down with that. And it's interesting, yeah, where it comes from, because I can see my mom, like if she makes a mistake or something, like we were just on family vacation and she happened to burn the hamburgers because the grill was too hot, no big deal, but was like very upset and wanted to go to the market. And it's just like, well, my sister's already at the market, let's just call her and have her do it. Like, and I saw it in real time. I was like, oh, this is where I get it from, but I am doing the work, the very messy work in therapy, and having conversations like this and being vulnerable and talking openly about it, I think is a luxury that previous generations did not have. And so they're less willing to admit, the mistakes, want to keep up the facade of perfection, because that was rewarded for them. And that was how they got ahead, especially as Black people in America for my family. And so I understand why. And I'm choosing to do things differently now for myself and then my daughter, so that we can disrupt that cycle and just have her like live her best life and not have, to do it perfectly. Like with your mom, I think, because same, I got frustrated with yoga at first when I started doing it, because it's like, why am I not getting this? This is too slow. I'm used to, like something fast paced. And what I love actually with Peloton and Dr. Chelsea Jackson Roberts, who is amazing. She's like the Beyonce of yoga, but she teaches a lot about slowing down, about the both and, about how yoga is a practice. That's what it is. It's a practice. It's not meant to be perfect. And in my own studies and becoming a certified yoga teacher, I've learned how like the asanas, or the postures that we are so conditioned to do in Western society, is a very small part of what yoga actually is. It's so much more than that. It's your breath, it's your movement, it's your mind, it's all of these things. But we have a very singular focus on, is my downward dog correct? Is my posture this and that? And that kind of like skews the whole meaning, and the greater significance of it gets lost in that. And so that's another, being present instead of being perfect. Like when I'm on the mat, like I, for a while, wouldn't do Chelsea's Sunday morning yoga classes because toddler, right? Like she's climbing all over me. But now I'm getting her involved in it. And I mean, we have to take bubble breaks, and sometimes she needs a snack or we need to read a book. but that is still yoga. It's not perfect. It's not the yoga that I did before where it was all quiet and serene and, it's a little messy and chaotic, but that is still yoga. I'm still showing up and I'm modeling for my daughter this self-care, that it's important that we take this time to love our bodies and be in our bodies.
Dum, 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 dum.
And now, some housekeeping. Hey, Reframables! Do you get something from these conversations? Would you consider becoming a supporter on Patreon? For as little as $2 a month, you could help to keep this show going. It's meaningful financially and relationally. It feels like a hug. For our Patreon supporters, we do mini episodes which we call Life Hacks and Enhancers, our 5 best things in a week. You could also tip us on our coffee account, where Natalie's recipe book is also for sale. Oh, and tell us what you want to hear more of. Listener messages make our week. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter. All the links are in our show notes. Love, Nat and Beck.
Dum, 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 dum.
Thinking of therapy and even just the idea of a practice, like the ongoingness of a practice, I loved the moment in the book. It's early on, so when people get it. They'll find this little moment where you like pause and say, okay, if you need to look up this reference to Ayan Levanzant, and you're like, I'll just take a second, I'm going to look at my Apple Watch while you go Google it, and then when you can come back. And I was like, yeah, I'm an insider because I knew the reference because I had been teaching a play to a bunch of my grade 12s years ago, and her name appears in an Amanda Paris play. For Canadian listeners who love the CBC, like, she had written this character as going through her own sort of spiritual practice of affirmations. And that was who she was using as kind of her guide. So anyways, I knew it, but the kids at the time in my class didn't know the reference. And so they essentially did what you told me to do, which was to go look it up. So we all had this like little learning moment. And I guess it sort of prompted me to ponder, like, with the book itself, is there a feeling that you're trying to write into this text where you're wanting people to feel like insiders, like an intimacy in terms of their readerly conversation with you as they maneuver through this ongoing practice of growth?
Absolutely. I mean, and everything that I write, my newsletters, my freelance work, my work at Fortune, especially if there's personal essays, I always strive for it to have this conversational tone. Like, we're in a cafe chilling with your best friend over lattes or mimosas. I write very clearly with my ideal reader in mind, who happens to be my friends, right? I think of my friends Stephanie and Sierra, especially, as these, not like avatars, because they're real people, but just kind of like, they're ambitious and they're successful and they're millennials. And that's like the Anala reference. I love pop culture. I love a good pop culture reference. I am an elder millennial. Those are throughout the book. And it's just meant to be, like peer to peer. This is not I have it all figured out, and so I'm giving you all of this guidance and directions and follow me because I'm amazing. It's like, no, I'm in this with you. Like, I am in the trenches and I'm not pretending to have it all figured out. I'm just sharing what has worked for me so far and inviting you on the journey as well, and cheering you on as you go and find yourself in what version like works for you. That is my hope, that this book, people will reference for years and years to come, will come back to it when they need a pep talk before a big job interview or a speaking engagement or launching, their own podcast or book or something else that has them feeling really nervous to take that step outside of their comfort zone. But we all know that that's where the magic is. It's very super uncomfortable, right? They're now like waiting for this book to come out. And I'm so anxious because it's been in my head since 2015. I started working on it in earnest in 2017 with the book proposal, and then writing it the last 2 years. It's been with me for a very long time. And it's like similar. And I know everyone like equates it to giving birth to a tiny human. And I imagine it'll be the same way, that this thing that has been so near and dear is now out in the world. And once it's out in the world, you can't really control it, right? Like, you can't protect it, and it's out there and it's open to interpretation for other people. And that's my hope, is that it will just serve as this resource, this pocket size pep talk, and just, something to help guide people through those difficult times that they'll come through time and time again, that they'll pass on to their friends when they're going through something as well, and that they will also laugh at my pop culture insider references.
Let's discuss how success is not linear. Because I know that's another one that I know cerebrally, but it's hard to feel it. Like I think, okay, at 42, I don't want to need more down. I want straight up from here. So I don't know. Let's just talk about that. L'Oreal, tell me something about that. That's a hard one.
Yeah. And I know that like Lean In, the book now has kind of this bad rep. And at the time in 2013, when I read it for the first time, it was this sort of like aha moment for me in reading Sheryl Sandberg's book. And she talks about the kind of jungle gym of your careers, because being in journalism, especially, there is a masthead. There is a very clear trajectory of what your career will look like. And I was on that path, right? I started as a reporter, then I moved up to assistant editor. Then I dabbled in, some wedding writing and freelance writing and other things for newspaper and other outlets, but I was always like editor-in-chief or bust. That had been my dream job since I was in middle school, because I subscribed to all the teen magazines and I was obsessed. Like we talk about the Peloton obsession, the teen mag obsession back in the late 90s, early 2000s was very real. And Black Girl Magic wasn't trending. Michelle Obama wasn't first lady. Beyonce was still in Destiny's Child. So there weren't the representations there are now as far as, like Black women in power, Black women in media. And I felt I didn't see myself represented in those pages. So that's why I realized, hey, I'm good at writing and I like this. I also like teen magazines. What if I put two together and try to be the change I want to see in the world, right? That made sense in my middle school brain. And I literally did everything around that. The high school that I went to and becoming editor-in-chief of my student newspaper. And then when I was in college, all the internships that I did, even one at a teen magazine, got an offer, but it was rescinded because of the economy. Thanks a lot, 2008. So it was just, I was on that track. I was climbing the masthead. And when I read that book, it had me rethink what success looks like, because in my head, there was this ladder and you climb it and the goal is to get to the top. But then later that year, I moved to Chicago. I started working at Jet. I feel like the closer I got to the top, or was able to see people who were at the top, I realized the editor-in-chief actually isn't doing all that much writing. Like they're in business meetings all day and that sounds boring. So like, what does that mean for me when all I want to do, all I've ever wanted to do is write? And so there was a lot that happened in the years following the Black Lives Matter movement. And that kind of was this reckoning for me in 2015, because it was like the reason, as I mentioned, I got into journalism in the first place was to help young Black girls. Like that's what I wanted to do. And I felt like I wasn't doing that. And I was just being very drained by covering different police shooting every day. I was burnt out, but I didn't know it because I didn't have the language, right? Like it wasn't a thing then like it is now. I wasn't in therapy. I didn't have a self-care routine. So I didn't have any of those tools in the toolkit to help bolster me when I was dealing, with reporting on a different name, a different city, but it's the same story essentially that continues today, unfortunately. And so I took myself out of it. I did about 5 years in nonprofit PR at Girl Scouts and then an education nonprofit, but I was still writing. I was always freelancing alongside of it. I had my newsletter, but I started to think about my own definition of success. And I think about that Maya Angelou quote where she says that success is liking yourself and liking what you do and liking how you do it. Can I say yes to all of those things? If not, then even if this job looks good on paper, does that mean that I am successful? Does that mean that I am happy? And I pivoted during the pandemic, as a lot of people did, the Great Resignation. I left the education nonprofit PR job, went back into full-time freelancing, and eventually landed at Fortune. But it's interesting because at the same time I was interviewing for my current role, I was interviewing for a managing editor position at another organization, and had to really have this like come to Jesus moment with myself about like, do I want to get back in and climb that masthead and get to the top? Or do I want to do what my heart's calling is and what I know I've been put on this earth to do, which is write? And even if that doesn't seem as successful, right, to some people to be like, oh, just a reporter or, something like that compared to the titles, the managing editor, the senior editors, the editor-in-chief. And I chose writing. And even if that doesn't look like someone else's version of success. It is for me, but there's been lots of ups and downs. Like I said, I left the industry altogether and came back. And I think that jungle gym mentality of my career, thanks to Lean In and Sheryl Sandberg and reading that back in 2013, gave me permission to experiment and see what else is out there. What else do I enjoy, rather than committing to, I have to climb this ladder and, like go all the way to the top, because the top doesn't always seem so fun, right? Like I look at it and it's just like, okay, I don't want to be in the meetings. I don't want to be responsible for, people's salaries and making hard decisions and all of those things. I want to write and I want to help people. And I'm very grateful that I get to do that every day.
Dum 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 dum.
It is interesting thinking about that idea of like, what does success mean to me? I mean, every Maya Angelou quote's going to be a good quote, but that's an especially good one in terms of having to check in, like the idea of checking in with the self, because as Becca and I do our work outside of the podcast in terms of writing and production and creation, we have each other to check in with in terms of like, is this next project going to not just be a success, but be part of our own growth process? And it is fatiguing to keep growing, because at a certain point it's like, haven't I done enough?
Right.
I'm the elder in this little trio of ours here right now, folks, and I feel like I've done a fuckload of growing. So I sort of want to go, at a certain point, I would just like to rest. And at the same time, do I actually want to rest is a big question I have to ask myself, because I'm constantly going after the next big idea that we can all create together. So that makes me ponder a little bit about kind of the idea of community. And Rebecca texted me as we were sort of reading your book, and she's like, Nat, I really think that L'Oreal and you have a similar community focus in terms of the way that you see the work you do on the page. And that certainly it's always been like that for me in terms of community building and education. So is that the heart of what you're going after here? I mean, you've said it, you're working to be writing for young Black girls to have this model to reach towards, but where is the community for you in it all as well?
Yeah, it's such a great question, because I've pondered this before, actually, my friend who's writing my bio, because I don't know what it is about writers that we can't write our own bio, but I was like, help me. And she asked a really great question that I can't remember exactly, but it was kind of along the lines of like, what or who are you doing this for? What do you get out of this? And I admitted that first and foremost, it's pretty selfish, right? Like writing for me is very cathartic. So even before there was the public facing writing and my student columns and everything else, I love journaling, because there's a lot of things going on in this brain at all times. Like my computer has 20 tabs open at all times. My head has about like 50. And so my journal is a safe place that's just mine, because what I do by being a journalist and an author, there is a lot of public facing writing. A lot of it is open to public consumption, but the journal is my place. Is kind of where I process it all, dump it out. And then from there are actual essays and parts of the book that I've written that have come from my journal. I pull from that. And the idea is to just share, for me, get it out there. And also in doing so, help others. I think back to in high school, as editor-in-chief of my student newspaper, and wrote a column about body positivity. It wasn't called that back then, of course, it was like 2004. But, just like this idea of self-esteem and body confidence and everything like that. And having my classmates, I went to an all-girl Catholic high school, and they were just like, oh my gosh, me too. Thanks for sharing this. I really appreciate it. And from then on, it's been like, okay, clearly I have a gift. And I also have a platform, and it's very important for me to use them both wisely, but also call people in and sometimes share the things that people aren't talking about openly. Black women and fertility, of course, a lot of people are talking about it now, and obviously Black maternal health and everything along those lines. And when I started to share our fertility journey, I didn't see a lot of representation. And I know if I'm going through this, somebody else has to as well. And so in what I'm writing, it's to share, just for me to get it out there. And like I said, very cathartic process, but also the community. I mean, I just wrote this morning's newsletter. It was about still trying to learn to love my postpartum body. Like we're 20 months postpartum and I'm still kind of like, oh, some days are better than others. And I hesitated to write about it because I'm like, oh my gosh, my readers are going to get so sick of me talking about this. And I was checking my inbox right before this call, and there's about 5 other moms who responded and were like, thank you for saying this. No one talks about what it looks like, almost 2 years postpartum and like the feelings and everything that come along with it. And so I've kind of made this career more or less about saying the thing that, or like, what is it people say? Like saying the quiet part out loud and like writing the quiet part out loud. And in doing that, inviting other people in. I mean, the story I still get the most comments about in DMs and emails, I wrote for Self a few years ago, actually right before we got our positive pregnancy test, about the multiple failed IVF cycles that we had gone through. And I can imagine what led someone to that story. It's 2 a.m., you just had another failed cycle, you're feeling very alone and frustrated, angry, all of the things. So you turn to Google, as one does, and my article pops up and they're like, oh, okay. Because I also feel like no one talked about, hey, IVF isn't this like magic solution. It's not perfect. It can still fail. No one warned me about that. So that was a whole thing. And then they read it, and naturally, because we're humans and we're curious, they Google me or they find me on Instagram and they see Violet and they're like, oh my gosh, like it happened. You didn't give up. You persevered. And this is giving me so much hope. That's why I do what I do, is to help others, especially in those dark moments where they feel alone, to know that there's someone else out there who gets it and is just rallying around them, and not in a, like I said before, I have all the answers, follow me, I know the way, but like, I'm in this with you and I know how much it sucks, but we're in this together. And so you don't have to ever worry about being alone.
So you're being this positive, vulnerable force on the internet, which is very different from, like, and you mentioned this, like the best 30 under 30, those kind of scam lists. Aren't they the worst?
Listen, many therapy sessions were spent on the 30 under 30 list before I learned that it's either like who you know, there's somewhere you can pay to get on. And it was just like, well, forget it. And I'm not even aspiring to 40 under 40 now. If it happens, great. But I'm not putting my personal value and what I am worth and what my work is worth onto a list that is half made up anyway.
Yeah, we have to remember that so many of these things are, it's just made up shit.
Yeah. I like that. It's all made up shit.
It's like that, was it on Whose Line Anyway? The points are made up and they don't matter or something like that. That's what I think about.
Yeah. That's so true. You also say that courage is a muscle that gets stronger as we use it, right? How do you flex that muscle?
Saying yes to things that scare me, releasing a book. Yeah, like I said, stepping out of that comfort zone. I have my sweet spot, right? Like I love, doing podcast interviews and other kind of like low key things. And I know that this book is going to require me to step out of that comfort zone, but it's necessary. And I just also think about modeling that courage and confidence, because I think confidence is also a muscle, and the more we use it. So of course, the first podcast interview I ever did, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrifying. And here I am today with a mic and we're having a great conversation. So it's, again, focusing on that practice, not perfection, and showing my daughter and like my friends and other people who think, oh, I can't do that. Yes, you can. You can. It's maybe hard, challenging, and there will be sticky spots, but you can work your way through them, and you have to give yourself grace in that process, because like I said, muscle, use it, exercise, yoga, it's not perfect. None of that. The goal is not perfection, or it shouldn't be. And so I think we just have to remember that it's all practice. Every day is practice. And how lucky are we that we get an opportunity to practice what that looks like.
There's a whole chapter in the book about negative self-talk, and have you flexed that muscle too in terms of positive self-talk? Because I found it interesting. Last night I went to bed and I Googled that self-compassion survey, and I just, I answered the questions and I went, oh, major fail. I'm going to sleep now. I have a major failing grade on that self-compassion test. But you have obviously practiced that muscle, like worked that muscle to speak to yourself in a more loving way. And does it work as you practice?
It ebbs and flows, right? There are seasons where I'm really good at it and I'm in the flow. Like this morning, I did my yoga, I did my meditation, and I had Beyonce playing in the shower, and like life is good. Now, earlier this week when I was in bed, because I was sick and I was like, you know, like those things, it's learning to be in the season that I'm in and that moment that I'm in is also being compassionate toward yourself. I remember taking that assessment at my very first therapy appointment and getting a failing grade as well. I think it was like 2.5 out of 10 or something. Their therapy speak was like, what I'm hearing is that you're not very kind to yourself. And it's like, well, no shit, Sherlock. That's why I'm here.
Paying you.
Yeah. It's like, help me. But think a lot about what would I say to a friend, right? We're often much kinder to our friends than we are to ourselves, our family members. I think about my sister, think about my daughter. Would I say this to her? Would I want her to say it to herself? Why am I saying it to me then? And then I've kind of adopted this third person pep talk when I need it, but I'll be like, pull it together, Peyton. Or like I listen to Beyonce when I need to really hype myself up, you know, like listen to Formation or Diva or just, you know, the whole Homecoming soundtrack. But those little tips and tricks to pull me out of that negativity, that negative self-talk, because it can become very loud. We are the voice we listen to most often. And so got to squish it down when it pops up, because it will. And, you know, it's human nature. Again, the goal isn't to get rid of it entirely, although that's great. And if anyone has any tips on how to do that, let me know. But to more so make it a little bit quieter, a little bit softer, and kind of tuck it away in the corner over there so that it doesn't have your full time and attention.
Yeah, I like that. And actually, it's funny. You mentioned writing yourself a letter.
Mm-hmm.
My therapist said that to me yesterday, and I was like, that's so cheesy, but fine. I will.
It is. It's very cheesy. I've had people do it, and it's very liberating. And also to read them at like workshops that I've done. And it's just like a good fuck you to that inner critic, right? Like, and a very public acknowledgement of it as well. So there's that accountability piece to it. And I think, yeah, like a lot of these things, they're cliche and they're cheesy, and it's just like, ugh. But then you do it and you're like, okay, actually, that wasn't so bad.
That was kind of useful.
Yeah.
My husband has always, and I've shared this on here before, his comment, we came together after other marriages. So we came together as a second marriage. And I have been very critical of parts of myself from my past. And his comment is always like, Natalie, put an arm around younger Natalie and just like love her. And it's funny because it's a really beautiful thought and it's a great tool. But actually, I kind of like the idea of the fuck you to another Natalie too, because maybe it's never just the one.
Yeah.
Right? Like we are multitudes.
Yeah.
So if there are a few Natalies to kind of like be in conversation with via a letter or just kind of like those internal tool moments, I could be putting an arm around the one who was hurt, but I could also be like, you get in a corner.
Yeah. You're in timeout.
To the other one, just you're on timeout forever.
Go sit over there, snarky Natalie. Yeah.
Exactly. Because there's something in that, right? Like acknowledging that the multitudes that we are now are also like brought forward from what we were, and that they sort of journey with us along the path until we're doing yoga classes like our mums.
It's as simple as that in a way, isn't it? It's weird. It's like we want it to be more glamorous, but it's just, I mean, you say in the book, it's just life is hard.
Do the work.
Got to stay on the road.
Dum 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 dum.